If there's a type of watch that's likely to be the most popular watch in the world, I think it's the diver. For sure, a Rolex Daytona or an Omega Speedmaster get a lot of press, and an integrated bracelet watch like a Patek to this day sell for ridiculous sums of money. But if there's a category apart from smartwatches that sells in the bucket loads, I think it's divers by a country mile. I want to get a grip on why this is the case, and more importantly, I want to explore what does it take to make a good dive watch? What are really good examples of good dive watches at different price points? Why some dive watches just don't succeed, despite potentially being very good? Why this category is just generally so unbelievably popular? And finally, the potential downside of all this popularity. To be called a dive watch, it needs two things. It needs a minimum water resistance of 200 meters, ideally 300 or more, and it has to have a dive bezel. The bezel can be internal like an IWC Aquatimer or external like a Submariner. It can have 15-minute gradations, full 60-minute gradations, and variations of a theme, but that is it. It can, but doesn't have to have a diver extension bracelet, fixed lugs, crown guards, helium escape valve, screw-down crown, rubber strap, bezel locks. All those things are extras in this broad dive watch definition, and they all go into making a true diver. But depth rating and bezel, that's what you need to call it a dive watch. It's a low bar, but that's the bar. You have three decisions you need to make when it comes to building a new dive watch. Your first question is, are you building a beta, a premium diver, or a luxury diver? That's the continuum. Prices go up as you go from beta to premium to luxury, and so should quality. Intuitively, a beta diver needs to be perceived as cheap. By definition, it has to be able to take a beating and keep on ticking. The owner's not going to care if it's banged up. At the end of the day, it'll end up being a feature that it looks a little bit banged up. The premium diver is the value-driven diver. It's solid, it's good looking. It likely looks a little more like a tool watch than a luxury watch, but it is generally so well put together that most buyers would prefer not to bang it up too much. The market largely defines what comes off as a premium diver, but buyers need to feel that build quality should track closely with price. The quality control in terms of bezel alignment, turning mechanisms, and bracelet tolerances need to be that bit better. In some cases, certain things need to be included in the design to signal that premium vibe. A good clasp with an easy adjust mechanism is a good example of a premium feature. Finally, there's the luxury diver. There actually aren't a lot of these, but the Submariner, the 50 Fathoms, and the Zenith Defy Extremes come to mind. These watches need to look luxury. Where a premium diver in some ways might still look like a diver you would go diving with, a luxury diver is less so. The case is likely going to be highly polished. The watch is going to have unnecessary materials like white gold applied markers. The watch will potentially have intricately finished movements, and of course it could potentially be made of materials that don't really lend themselves to diving. Second consideration is the aesthetic. Using a continuum again from esoteric to conventional. Conventional is popular. Conventional is what people expect. Conventional is the watch that in its purest form is a little bit generic. It's the instantly recognizable basic dive watch. On the other end of the scale, you get watches that take a completely different path visually. They look very, very different. For the manufacturer, though, it's not purely an aesthetic exercise, though. Some of those more unusual design choices are there to communicate that this is a more serious dive watch. The conventional watch is the Black Bay 41. When you move along the continuum, just adding fixed lugs makes it ever so slightly less conventional. Then you get to the Seiko Willards and the Doxa 300s and the Blancpain Tech Gombessa and the Ploprofs. And finally, it's the specs. How much of a serious dive watch do you want it to be? This is where depth rating and escape valves and oil-filled cases and all other hyper-specific technical innovations come into play, and they are independent, at least partially, to the aesthetic. More often than not, the more specced out watches will also tend to be more unusual in design, but not always. A Deep Sea Challenge is on paper at least an incredibly capable dive watch on specs alone, but aesthetically, it's just a larger version of a very conventional Submariner design. The same goes for Planet Ocean. It's still relatively conventional, but it has a ton of complex dive specs. So you go through all three of those steps because they are what set your cost profile for building the watch and the size of the audience you're targeting. What are really good examples of good dive watches at different price points? I'm going to mention Rolex. Yes, the company that makes up 1/3 of all Swiss watch sales is being brought up. That doesn't make me a fanboy or a shill. It's just a fact that the Rolex Submariner is the quintessential luxury conventional medium spec dive watch. It has everything you need in a good luxury desk diver. It doesn't have too many specs frills, but it's competent and shiny as a luxury watch should be. If you want premium, Tudor Black Bay 41 or Christopher Ward Trident. Both are conventional. Both are positioned as value, although the Tudor is ever so slightly leaning into that luxury space by now, and they are both technically competent. In the beta space, it's Citizen Pro Masters and Seiko SK models. Some might feel that they are a little bit expensive to be called betas. It's fair enough, but it's in this $250 to $700 space you find those kind of beta conventional watches. Now, if you want a premium diver with a slightly less conventional look, Sinn has you covered with a U50. If you want it with luxury specs, you go for the Planet Ocean. Then there's the esoteric choices. A Casio Frogman, a Doxa if you want to go premium, and if you want to go luxury, Zenith. Zenith generally go a little bit harder on the specs and a little bit more extreme on the designs. So the new extremes and the A3684 definitely lean luxury. You can also get esoteric luxury watches. It's the Ploprofs, it's the Blancpain Tech Gombesas. Put all those three things together and add a fourth component, which is make a watch that's not ugly, which is easier said than done, and then you have your watch. Why is this category just generally so unbelievably popular? It's not like dive watches have always been the most popular watches. There's also no guarantee that they will continue to dominate to the extent that they have in the last couple of decades. But right now, their popularity comes down to what they represent as products and how we live our lives today. Today, fewer and fewer of us wear suits to work. Formal attire and watches that match formal attire, like dress watches, are just not in vogue to the extent that they have been. Nomo still sells their Tangentes and Patek sells a Calatrava here and there, but our world is less formal, less stiff, and classic dress watches are just not as necessary as they have been. Wearing a dress watch today with casual attire is still relatively rare. And often you'll see that the watches are more playful and light-hearted. Studio Underdog is a good example of this. But the conventional diver, especially on a bracelet, has versatility like no other watch. A dress watch on a NATO often looks weird. Field watches don't work well in a formal environment, but a diver, especially a ceramic one, often works well as a dressy watch too. A Doxa 300T is going to have a hard time, but the Black Bay 41 in monochrome looks like a tool watch when it needs to and can appear dressy when it needs to as well. It's infinitely stylable, more so than a Speedmaster, I think. And finally, the dive watch is still a tool watch. The Datejust or an integrated PRX are cool watches, but we live in an active lifestyle world and dive style watches have that outdoors vibe. Put all those things together. An environment that makes some watch styles less appealing, a design that is in its base form incredibly adaptable while still communicating a tool and outdoor ethos. A chronograph doesn't do that. A field watch doesn't have that breadth of use cases either. A dress watch definitely doesn't. Only the diver and the sibling, the GMT, has the range that a Submariner or a Black Bay monochrome or any other diver has. We like these watches because we literally often can go anywhere and do anything with them. Very few other watches really succeed at doing that. Despite their versatility and contemporary popularity, not all watches succeed to the extent that manufacturers hope. Obviously, you have to define what success looks like. For some brands, selling a couple of hundred watches is a success. But if you're Zenith and you're only selling a couple of hundred Zenith Defy Extremes, chances are Zenith is going to see that as a failure. I do, however, think that you can trace some perceived failures back to those decisions around making it a beta or a premium or a luxury, making it conventional or esoteric, and the specs. Generally, I don't think specs sell. Mostly all specs do is drive up the cost of your watch. Sinn has their Hydro line, which can go to 5,000 meters or more. They are incredibly capable watches, but you have to send them to Sinn to have them serviced because the case is filled with oil. It's a party feature. In the luxury space, you can do it as a kind of piece unique approach, like Rolex and Blancpain sometimes do. The Deep Sea Challenge was always there to establish Rolex's credentials rather than to sell a whole lot of Deep Sea Challenges. If there's a brand out there that seriously launches a watch like this with the belief that it's going to lead to huge sales, they are going to be very disappointed. Specs are cool for watch nerds, but realistically, very few people really care. Those esoteric watches are obviously going to have more of a niche market, but they can still be a success. The Ploprof, I think, likely sells relatively well for the brick that it is because it's so clearly marketed towards an enthusiast. I do have a sneaking suspicion that the most successful esoteric designs are more likely to be premium or low-end luxury watches. Paying for a Doxa 300T or a Willard is something a lot of people are willing to do to differentiate themselves from the conventional diver crowd, and a beta buyer is likely also very open to something that looks unconventional. The luxury buyer, though, I think is by definition going to be more conservative. That's why I think something like the Zenith Defies, the A3684, is going to have a hard time. The Defy is a luxury watch, and Zenith are really trying to make the 70s dive watches happen. But in the luxury space, I don't think it's going to fly. For the very same reason, I don't think the Aquatimer from IWC does nearly as well as they would love it to. So if you want to sell a lot of watches, the conventional space is the one you go for. Which is where I think the biggest failures are, because this is where the expectations are biggest on the part of the brands. Everybody wants that conventional diver in their lineup. The Submariner, the Black Bay, the ProMaster, the CQ, the Hydro Conquest, the Seiko SJEs. But it's so easy just to make a bland, unremarkable diver that in no way stands out from the crowd. The Monta Ocean King, which I quite like, by the way, has been, at least online, criticized in its third iteration. Why? Because a lot of people felt it looked a bit too much like a Submariner. And that's not even the watch that's at the biggest risk. I give you the 2024 Bremont Supermarine date. Let's just agree right off the bat that this watch can't be any more conventional. There's literally nothing apart maybe from the bracelet links that set it apart from a Black Bay or a Hydro Conquest or a Submariner. What exactly does this watch bring to the table that all the other conventional premium watches don't also bring? The biggest problem right now, I think, with dive watches is this convergence on the safe dive watch. Everybody and their sister wants their version of the 39 or 41 millimeter Black Bay with premium features and conventional styling. When everybody aims for this market with their generic cookie cutter, middle of the road design, you just don't stand out. On pure looks, the Supermarine, which I saw at Watches and Wonders in the metal, looks relatively good, but it's competing with the Tudor. I'm sorry, but in very few scenarios is the Bremont winning that battle. It's also going to have a hard time against something more affordable from Monta or Formex or Christopher Ward. When you go to the extremes, so ultra luxury or ultra beta, and when you also take the direction of esoteric, the market is going to be smaller and you're going to sell less watches. That's fine if that's what you're aiming for. But in the conventional space, it's precisely that convergence on that bland, middle-of-the-road, derivative nature of designs that potentially kills you. Very few brands, and here again, I can't avoid bringing up Rolex or Tudor again. Those brands have a patent, a lock on the middle-of-the-road safe design. Competing with them is potentially a losing proposition if you don't try to have something that sets you apart. This is why, and I think a whole lot of other people were disappointed with something like the Bremont Supermarine. Maybe it will end up being a hit for Bremont. Who knows? But even if it does, do we really need another generic middle-of-the-road broadly spec'd diver? Zenith gets a whole lot of flack for the new Defies, but they are definitely trying something different. Formex is going more conventional, but they are trying something different design-wise. When some brand way back came up with the idea to introduce faux Tina and smaller cases, that was a risky move. Now, faux Tina and small cases is the middle of the road. Originally, it was taking a chance. This is what we need to not perpetuate this feeling of stale, uninspiring releases. Brands that chase the middle-of-the-road customers miss the point, because the middle-of-the-road customer does not start the next big thing. The manufacturers have to try and step out of their comfort zone to come up with some teeny tiny thing that might become the next big thing. And when everybody is doing that big thing, then you need to start thinking about the next innovation. You need to be trying to set yourself apart from the middle and not be trying to aim for the middle with those designs that most blandly appeal to the archetypical average customer. Brands like Rolex would love to churn out the same thing year after year with very minor tweaks. It's safe, it's profitable, but it puts you at risk of being irrelevant. And Rolex only succeeds because they dominate in terms of branding. So we should celebrate brands that try to be just a little bit different, because pushing the envelope is healthy and change is good. Now you tell me, who is trying something different in the dive watch space? Who is succeeding on not necessarily being crazy, but just trying to bring an interesting interpretation to the table? Also, do you agree that the Supermarine is at best forgettable, or am I wrong? Is it a sleeper hit? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.